tonight, and we're just going to go live to Facebook. Let me turn this off. Let me see. How are we all doing anyway? Everybody all right? Did you have a nice weekend? Share in your group. Share. Okay. That's us. All right. We are preparing the live stream, Leos. Okay. All right. So here we are on our final night together. This is actually the final night. Thank you all for coming back for the last part of the process. Hope you've had a lovely weekend and that you've had time to maybe process anything that you needed to process from the material. It's been up there long enough. Thank you for the lovely feedback that we got. And thank you for the guys who have joined our program. We'll see you all very soon. Hopefully anybody that's on the fence will may make up their mind, and we might see them either in October or February. It is October already, I imagine. So let us recap. All right. Use the chats now as we go through this. We have three particular case studies, and we're going to work our way through a treatment plan for the 3 different case studies. But before we do that, let us have a wee look at. Let us have a little look at the diamond model, and we'll do a tiny recap just because we're a few days away from the main summit. Let me see. There we go. Okay, we've spent a long time now discussing some, not all, but some of the issues around the treatment of anxiety. So we spent probably, out of the 2 days of the summit, we spent 2 days talking about therapy, what I call therapeutic exchange capacity. We talked about what happens, what the client brings, the process, how the client's process is brought into therapeutic exchange, the functions of the mind, the process of the client, and how that gets in the mire in therapeutic exchange. And we talked about all of the assessments that we might need to make prior to beginning our work. And that's fundamentally what we're going to start with tonight. We talked about intolerance. We did not talk about re-experiencing. I will mention that tonight just as a small caveat, because it's actually a really important part of the program. And then we talked about symptoms being tolerance of symptoms being titration, building capacity of symptoms, and then moving out and the sovereignty and agency of symptoms, which is very different. And then we talked about how we access root cause very safely, very carefully, very trauma informed, with titration, moving along these steps of awareness as the client brings us to a deeper understanding of root cause. Now, anybody, any questions about anything on that they'd like me to cover before we end? And if you have no questions, I'll keep a wee eye in the chat. If you have no questions, what we'll do is we will just dive automatically and do the treatment plan if nobody has any questions. Was that like a 2-second recap of what was 5 days of hard work or 4 days of hard work? Hopefully I've captured it. I will come back to intolerance part B because it's a really important part of the process. Armandy, if I don't give the detail of that, will you remind me? Hold my feet to the fire here, because once I get into this material, I'll find it difficult to come back. So remind me. Okay, all right. So if nobody has any questions, we'll fire ahead. Okay, so treatment plans is one of the key features of our program. And the treatment plan is, for me, it's a real, whenever we're working with anxiety, a treatment plan for anxiety is a really, really, really important part of the process for many, 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 many reasons. One of the main reasons is that we can gather a scope of work. You know, when you walk into a building Anybody ever done a scope of work for a new build or done a scope of work for a new project? I like to look at anxiety as a scope of work, anxiety treatment as a scope of work, and have a think about where is the start and what's the end journey likely to be. So treatment plans become for me a really, really important kind of scope of work. Now, why is that beneficial? I mean, it's beneficial for your client because if we just are sitting in therapeutic exchange the entire time, just waiting to see if the client can deepen, waiting to see if the client's got toleration, waiting or doing some body-led work. What we tend to do is bob around the process with no clear defined end game, no clear defined interventions. That the interventions tend to arise as the therapeutic exchange happens, and there's no clarity of process. And that can be very disconcerting for client and therapist, because you're just literally having to work moment by moment inside the therapeutic exchange to decide what interventions you need. So when we look, when I teach treatment plans inside the program, I teach them very systematically so that we can basically divide and conquer. We can divide and conquer the anxiety itself. So it's really important as well, not only for the therapist to understand, but for the client to understand. The client can get caught in that hope, hurt, despair cycle really quickly, especially if they have been around other therapists, especially if this isn't their first rodeo. And also if it is their first rodeo, they often need to understand that the depth of their pain will be met where it's needed. Does that make sense? That's a really important, we linger there a wee tiny minute, where the depth of the pain is that they need is met. So if a client is fundamentally petrified, has intolerance, let's use the words that we'll use in the assessment. If the client has a complete intolerance of the body, and that for them in that moment or in that time frame is their primary pain, can you understand why deepening wouldn't be a good idea? Because you're not meeting the client where their primary pain and their primary need is. That's why clients DNA, that's why they don't engage. If we're trying to apply a intervention because we know the protocol or because we understand the protocol, because it has been laid out in another framework or in another training session, but we're not meeting that need in the client, then what we're going to get is exhausted clients, and we're going to get a therapeutic process that's going to jam and be difficult. Tell me what you are thinking about that. Tell me how you feel about that. Does that make sense to you? It becomes a really important, for me, the process of the treatment plan becomes part of this conscious contract that you have with your client, that you know where they are, that they know where their primary need is, and that you then can take these steps towards meeting that need. And not only can you take those steps, but you can actually nearly time frame it. And I know therapeutically that sounds like a disaster that you would give any level of time frame. But such is the way that you should be able to chunk this work down. There should be a very rough timetable for it. And I'm going to explain that in a wee minute. I'm going to explain how we would do that in a wee minute. Yes, Armandi.
How soon can you discern that timeline?
Very quickly. I'll go through three clients, all different stages of process. And what I'll get you to do for me is I'll get you to discern the timeline. All right. So, because if you know the work that's needed done to move the client to the next stage of process, then you can very quickly discern the sections of time to move the client through. So let's take that as let's actually work with that now. I'm just wondering have I got everything? Yeah. So basically, what you're looking at in terms of a treatment plan is you're looking at an entire assessment when that client comes in. Who works with assessments at the moment? Do you work with core? What kind of assessments do you work with? Will you let me know in the chat? Rachel, what are you taught? What are you taught to work with? Is a core assessment you're taught? No, not yet. Not yet. Okay. So if you let me know in the chat what your current is core and agency led. Yeah, Carolina, absolutely. I would have been taught to work with a core assessment. So it's already a various, core, yeah, very substantial core assessment. It measures 4 particular areas, measures risk, measure well-being, remind me what else it measures. So what we're doing is adding to that core, and I'm not suggesting for 1 second that the assessment should replace core, because it shouldn't. Functioning and problems, thank you, because a lot of the stuff that I'm going to bring in here actually is covered in core. So what you might be able to do then is just take out your own assessments or your own indicators, as I'm going to give them to you now, and add them to your core. But the first thing that I will work with, even though I'm person-centered trained and obviously clear method trained, the first thing that I will assess or ask is any prior diagnosis. Whilst I won't work towards the diagnosis, or whilst I don't see it as a death sentence, it is a good starting point. It's a good understanding of whether a client has been in previous therapy or not. Now, we talked about CP, post-traumatic stress and complex post-traumatic stress earlier. Now, whilst they have pieces of the puzzle have anxiety or panic disorder attached to them, we know that they're fundamentally a trauma-led diagnosis. But if we get a client with any of that diagnosis, PTSD or CPTSD, and when we understand that there's an entire body of work that is probably prior to this, and then it'll be up to you to understand within the model what would fit that PTSD. Does that make sense? Because what I've already said is that the treatment of this model is more generic to anxiety and panic. Now, it will have the capacity to treat elements of PTSD, but not the entirety of it. So if you're looking at this model to completely treat PTSD, it won't be suffice. Yeah, now we will work through protocols, because you're going to get clients with diagnosis, so you're going to have to work with protocols. But what we tend to work with in our model is the clear method. The clear method is exceptionally good for some of the deeper work that is required in complex post-traumatic stress. That is not part of this training. That is a training in and of itself, and it takes about 1.5 years to complete. So but this training will help you, absolutely will help you for the other anxiety disorders that present themselves as a complete system with your own modalities clicked on. Am I clear? Is that clear enough? So when we assess to understand where we will go within the model. So if there is a diagnosis, that's fine. And if there's no diagnosis, then we'll move to our first stage of assessment, which is to assess the stages of process. Okay, so the first thing that I will do as an assessment is to assess the stage of process. I'm just pulling out these stages now. The second thing that I will do is I will check what we call psychosomatic unity, and we'll check unity. Yeah, we'll check unity for any trauma responses. Now, what does that mean? If a client is disunified from their body and we reunify them, are we likely to put them into a trauma response? Has anybody ever seen that happen? The reunification of the mind and body can, in and of itself, cause a trauma response. Absolutely, Sandra. We'll cover all of that. So the question that you have to ask yourselves is, what stage is my client in? First question, the first assessment. Second assessment is, if there is unity, will that unity likely cause a trauma response? Does everybody understand why we ask that question? Because no matter what way you go here in that model, if you go to deepen on the therapeutic exchange, if you go to understanding what happened to the client at root cause, and you begin to understand that client is going to embody what they embedded, and if they embody what they embedded without support, without scaffolding, without titration, then you're going to get a trauma response inside the therapeutic process, which is fundamentally what happens when a client is re-traumatized. Does that make sense? And disunity is one of our best assessments, because it tells us the level of capacity the client has to be within their body. And if it's nil, then we know there's an awful lot of work to do here. An awful lot of work. The next thing that I will assess will be the capacity for therapeutic exchange itself. If the stage of process is low, if the disunity is low, the level of tolerance is the next thing I'll assess. If the level of tolerance is very, very, very low, so they've no tolerance of any of their physical symptoms of anxiety, note the difference between that and unity, then the next question answers itself. What's the therapeutic exchange like? A client who's a low stage of process, has disunity, has very, very, very low tolerance of their anxiety symptoms, is likely not to be able to hold therapeutic exchange or therapeutic process for too long, and is likely to lock you out of any deepening of any kind. And they're likely to keep you at a very high level of intellectual conversation. Is everybody with me? So the next thing that we do is that we start to get into the granular detail. What's the metacognition like? What level of process is that? What's their introspection? So have they got any capacity at all to be in the body? Can they be in the physical body? Can they be in the somatic body? Note the difference between the two. Can they be in any emotion? Some emotion, not too many. You know, what's their level of capacity with emotion? And the last one, which is, I think, incredibly important, is what's their level of awareness on root cause? Do they have any level of awareness on root cause? Tell me what you're thinking in the chat. I know you're quiet in the chat, but I'd love to hear what you think about that. Can you see how those basic, and there's another 2 pieces of assessment as well, but can you see how those basic assessments would open up our interventions? Does that make sense to you? Can you see already the types of work that may need to be done here? We also want to understand the resourcing, which can be done inside the core, although not directly, but it can be, we can understand their levels of problems like sleep and stuff like that, and they can be done inside the core as well. So you've got the core, you don't have to ask those separately. But I like understanding resourcing, and I like understanding types of resourcing, adaptive or maladaptive, it doesn't matter. There's no shaming on any of the resourcing. I just like to understand if it's adding to the anxiety patterns. And I like to understand their capacity. Yeah. You intrinsically assess them. It's useful to approach it. And it's for me, it's incredibly important. Now we're about to get into the details of this, all right? So let's work with 3 particular clients. And we're going to run through the details of 3 particular clients in that order, all right? So let's work with a, yeah, let's work with a client who very interestingly shows up with a very high stage of process. So stage 5, stage 6, is everybody with me? Yeah, client shows up without any previous diagnosis. So he's a young male, a young adult male, and he shows up without any previous diagnosis. But he is able to articulate incredibly well an event that has happened within the month, a traumatic event that has happened recently as just a month. Is everybody with me? Does everybody see where we're going here in terms of diagnosis? Very interestingly, for a young man, is a very, very high stage of process. Okay? It has no particular, it has full unity, and there's no trauma response in the unity. So he has full access to his body. Is everybody with me? And he doesn't have intolerance of his anxiety symptoms, although he doesn't like them. And that's why he's here, because he wants rid of them. But he doesn't have an intolerance of them. So he's not afraid of his body. Everybody with me? Is everybody following me? I am watching Anne, Thomas, Donna, Rachel, and Armandi. Just you keep nodding, and if I lose you, you're speaking on behalf of this group, all right? So it's up to you to type in the chat and tell me if I've lost you. His therapeutic exchange is incredibly good because he has the capacity in his body. He doesn't have an intolerance. He's not alive with anxiety. He's not alive with fear. His capacity to be in his body really good. His metacognition is excellent. It's actually probably one of the reasons that he's in so much difficulty, because he's aware of a lot of the stuff that's in his own head. All right. His interoception is incredibly detailed. It can give you colors, it can give you shapes, it can give you movement, it can give you location of emotion, it can give you the difference in somatics, the difference in anxiety, it can give you all of that really, really, really fluidly. And he is able to isolate and target the root cause, which is this event that has happened. What do we do with this guy? What is our first intervention? What is our first protocol? If we think about the diamond model, then a lot of the early work in the diamond model is to create tolerance so we can go to root cause. Here he is showing up, excellent therapeutic exchange, doesn't have any intolerance, is able to be with the symptoms, doesn't have any fear of his body, can actually talk about his patterns and maps, can talk about the anxiety, has got a lot of fluidity, seems to have a lot of sovereignty over it, seems to be in a very high stage of process, and can actually give us root cause material. What do we do? Do we take him through the maps and patterns process? Would that be helpful to him? Rachel, see that nod in your head? That's right. Trust yourself. Trust yourself. No, you wouldn't. Why wouldn't you? Because you wouldn't be meeting him where he's at. He's at root cause. He's ready to work with that root cause material. All the indicators, all his indicators indicate at this stage that he's aware of his anxiety, he's aware he's not moving into panic, he's not dysregulated by it in this, and he's able to articulate it, understand it. So what has happened to this young man is that he's had a sporting injury. He's been on a football field and he's had a sporting injury and he was concussed during a football match. He didn't realize he was concussed. Everybody else around him didn't realize he was concussed. He got back up after the initial injury and he started to continue to play. As he started to continue to play, he didn't know where he was. He didn't know what he was doing. Can we see what root cause we might have here? He didn't remember what he was doing. He didn't remember what he should have been doing. He's playing an active football match with people watching him. He goes off at half time. He comes back on at half time, off at second half. He's concussion. Doesn't know his own name. And he continues to run around the pitch until he actually gets so bad that he has to sit down. And when they come over to him, when the medics come over to him, at this stage, he has no memory of how he got there, no memory of what's happening. But he's had to sit on a bench for the rest of the half, in and out of memory loss. Doesn't know if it's real or not, doesn't know if this world is real. Can't trust himself. He's beginning to lose trust in himself, beginning to lose trust in his ability or in his own awareness. He's in a very masculine environment where they're all joking and jovial because they know that he's lost his memory, and they're joking and saying, "Do you remember scoring your 5 goals?" To which he doesn't know if he did or not. And he has to travel on a bus the whole way across the country until he gets back home. Now he's an adult male, but he's still living with his parents. So he has no support, it hasn't been diagnosed, he hasn't been to the doctor, he hasn't been checked out, and this is some 5 hours later, he's been exposed to this environment. Would it be helpful for you to do maps and patterns? The answer is no. You will be taking him away from processing exactly what happened. If you did any regulation work, it would be only as a tool to help him titrate through the memories. Because what is he asking? He's asking to process the difficult memories of what happened. Does everybody see that as clear as day? And you see that? Happy enough? So within this model, we can assess where he needs to be. Now we can take pieces of the puzzle out of that and still be able to assess what work needs done. What stage of process might he be in at root cause, and how many shelves of awareness might we need? We probably need 4 or 5, because I'm sure there's a lot more material inside those memories, like material like shame, material like embarrassment, material like uncertainty. But as we would work through those shelves of awareness by opening root cause and just keeping an eye on these titration, keeping an eye on these regulation levels, we would meet him where he's at. We would meet him with his primary pain. We would meet him exactly as he is. And we would begin to process those details of what happened. Now, if this client wasn't met where he is, if he isn't triaged, for want of a better word, if he isn't assessed, when he comes in, if he's not assessed, and we start to do protocols or interventions that don't fit his frame of reference, then we can elongate those memories being locked out of being processed by the hippocampus. We can elongate those difficulties, that difficult event, that 2-day difficult event. We can elongate the processing of that. And as we elongate the processing of that, that can very quickly is the wrong word, but if that's missed and that process and his stage of process is missed, then we can be moving to post-traumatic stress. And then from post-traumatic stress, right into complex post-traumatic stress. Because you could see how this would affect somebody's sense of self, somebody's ability to communicate, somebody's ability to relate. This event would then turn into something that gets chronic. So inside this framework, what we're saying is that we can access very quickly with clear assessment of its safety, working in that material. How does that feel, Lise? Any questions? Does that make sense? Any questions? Was that a helpful assessment? Because I know we've been working with low-level processing a lot, and we didn't do any of the higher processes. Brilliant, Armandi. Again, so Armandi's question is, how long would that take? The how long would the root cause stuff take is a wee bit harder to assess than the actual upper end of the model. So how long, how much material are we looking at processing here? How many shelves of awareness? When we talk about root cause, is he, is he fully available of all of the material inside it, all the shame, all the, no, he's not. He's only available of the incident, and he can talk about the incident, but he's not available to the internalization of that. So that will take some time to process, and probably take, a good few months to process at a deeper level all of the detail of that in a way that it becomes, that it's able to become non-traumatic. Because what would you imagine would make these memories traumatic? Type in the chat for me. What is if we're in shelves of awareness, understanding, internalization as we deepen into root cause, and that's all taught in the program too, what would you imagine is the actual reason for this trauma? What is the trauma? What is the internalization of the trauma inside these memories? Just stick it in the chat for me. Suppression of subconscious fear of layers. Yep. Anything else? I've already alluded to some of the deepening that you may have to do. Do you remember our core and key threats? Do you remember? Yeah, there's very specific questions within each stage, Kim. Do you remember our core and key threats? Fear of the loss of self. Loss of control. Brilliant, Anne. Yeah. Loss of self, loss of control. Loss of reality, all of that stuff, shame. What's the functions of the mind likely to be producing here? So he's going to have to understand how his mind's functioning. If he's afraid to lose control, if he's afraid to lose control, what is the afraid to lose control, over function, control and everything? Brilliant. So are we starting to get a glimpse of what type of work that we might need to do, Armandi? And we're in root cause. Yeah, you see the detail of that? We're going to have to address the key threat, or sorry, the core. We're going to have to address the key threat being the memory of the event. Yes, 3 to 6 months. Now, I love the way that you're assessing this yourself, even in root cause. Because not only are we going to have to go through the memory of the key event, but we're going to have to work in the core threats of the loss of self and the loss of control. Yeah, and we're going to probably have to process some shame, some embarrassment, some humiliation because of this toxic environment, this toxic sports environment. There was also some things that he did that were out of character. And there was also this unsafety that he felt because there was no one explaining what was happening. He didn't understand what was happening. So he'll have to process that. So you're talking 3 to 6 months easy. Does that make sense? Really important here. Okay, are we ready for number 2? Yes, very confusing. I know, Diane. And I love the way that you're extrapolating there. Because what you're doing here, as you understand root cause and as you understand what actually creates trauma memories and why trauma memories are formed, you know, not only is it the loss of reality, not only is it the loss of control, you know, it's so difficult. The shame, the humiliation, the environment that he was in. Yeah. And this is the truth as he brought it. This is his experience. This is his truth. And all that we do is get to work within that frame of reference as the client experienced it. And all we do is get to work at these levels as the client unpacks what was specifically traumatic for them inside those moments. And work inside the key threats and the core threats. And there's an example of root cause and the detail of why key threats, yes, the totality of the whole experience for him in those moments and after, in the context that he saw that environment, in the context that he felt he was in, regardless of whether you believe it or not, regardless of whether it's up, down, right, wrong, doesn't matter. Your interpretation here is irrelevant. The client's internalization and interpretation, the client's perception matters. Oh, it's all that matters. Because these are his, this is his internalization, this is his totality of the experience. That's all we get to work with. Get to work with deepening and understanding that. And as we do that and process that, then we can process the memories that belongs to and start to let that move through the mind. Let that move through the limbic system. Let that move through the body. How does that feel? Have we exhausted this client? Can we see why maybe doing any other work? What if you set this client down and did some psychoeducation? Would that be helpful? Yes. Possibly. Would it be helpful without conscious contracting? No. Is that part of what the client needs? Is that part of where the client believes that is the best use of your time and his time? Could that be molded and moved through the process? Yes. But as an intervention in and of itself, it's probably useless in this. Working on maps and patterns, useless. Titration, possibly helpful, but not with a conscious contract. Yeah. Okay, brilliant, fantastic. So client 1, let's wipe that client clean and let's do client 2. Okay, client 2. Anybody else, any questions about that? No? Happy enough? Okay, so client 1 presents as a female and presents with a lower stage of process and an around 3. Client presents with okay levels of metacognition. Yeah, and inside that metacognition, they're aware of the thoughts, they're aware of their dysregulated nervous system, their introspection. They can distinguish between physical feelings and panic. So they know they're in panic. Is that becoming quite clear? They know panic symptoms, they know anxiety symptoms. Yeah, they have an intolerance of those anxiety symptoms. And if in therapeutic exchange get too close to those symptoms of the body or of anything that reminds them of those symptoms or causes those symptoms, they'll come out of therapeutic exchange quite quickly. They'll be triggered and come out of the process. How does that feel? Yeah. So we would say that this client is probably would probably present as phobic of their own body. Now they have unity in that they can access physical and physical symptoms, so their mind and body is unified, but they don't have great unity when it comes to emotions. So we know that we have a level of unity in terms of physical symptoms. So their introspection tells us that, their distinguishing factors in the introspection tells us that. But we know that they don't have any unity to their felt sense. Not full felt sense anyways. Maybe some of the better feelings like hope and happiness, but certainly not some of the deeper feelings. Yeah, everybody with me for that? Okay, so the resourcing is in relationships and tends to kick back into some of the reasons for anxiety. And their sleep process and their general well-being is pretty good enough. Okay, client can't be too long in therapeutic exchange because they get too heavily triggered by their body. What's our first thing to do? What are we doing? They have unity. So they have access, but they're petrified of their body. What's our first protocol? Straight away. What's our first thing that we could think that we need to do here? Type it in the chat for me. Do we continue to let the client show up in therapeutic exchange every week? Maps and patterns, Sandra, that's it. Yeah. I'd straight on the maps and patterns for this client. I'd create sovereignty and agency where I could. You might bring them in by, you might do some psycho-ed inside it, but I think this client's inside her frame of reference is that her primary pain is in the symptoms. And if we could get sovereignty over that, then you'll create a lot more therapeutic exchange. You'll create a lot. So because she's got unity, and here's the distinguishing feature, because she's got unity, because she is able to access these feelings, then you probably have much more luck staying and meeting her with her primary pain, which is her body. Now, you might want to titrate to that and make sure it's safe. But if you met her with maps and patterns and got some relief, got some sovereignty and agency on that, what do you think the outcome would be? What do you reckon? Type it in the chat. What would happen to her levels of metacognition? What would happen to her levels of introspection if we did maps and patterns? They would all increase, and our level of intolerance, yes, our level of intolerance or level of tolerance would increase. Sovereignty. And then she's able to come back and have more therapeutic exchange. What's the difference between maps and patterns and regulation work? Why wouldn't we have done increase and become more available? It should become more available. She'll also trust you that you knew where her primary pain was and that you knew how to intervene and work there. How long would it take us to do maps and patterns? Probably 6 to 8 weeks with somebody who has access to their body. So what's the difference between regulation work and maps and patterns in this case? Why would we choose one over the other? She has an intolerance. She's phobic of her own body. Do you think a client, yes, she's unity, Armanda, yes. Do you think a client who has unity, a client who can feel as a client who is phobic of her own body would be happy enough just regulating that? If you've ever had anxiety symptoms or panic symptoms and somebody says, would you like to regulate or would you like to create sovereignty? They take the whole hand off you for sovereignty. Would you like to stop these building symptoms, or would you just like to bring yourself back around from them when you get them? And take away some of the shame of it and take away, they'll take your hand off for that particular client because of her level of intolerance. I will go straight to maps and patterns because she has capacity. And that's denoted by her assessment. Do you see how systematic it is? And do you see how the assessment at the beginning helps us frame what we need to do and the steps that we need to do it. And did you see how those two different clients are completely different? And then we know, so let's do a time frame here, depending on the depth of the pattern. She's got unity, so we should be able to start really quickly in patterns, and then we should be able to map really quickly. So we're talking 6 to 8 weeks here. You say to this client, in 6 to 8 weeks, we can create body sovereignty. What do you think she'd feel? Rachel, you're laughing. I can see them wee rosy cheeks. Rachel is down there laughing because she's saying, yep, I know, because that was me. I know exactly how she feels. She thinks she's won the lotto. She thinks she's won the lotto. Now, this is a really interesting point here. Because there is such phobic energy, because there is such focus, because all our mind's focus will have been on our body symptoms. Once you relieve those body symptoms, I see your face, Rachel. Once you relieve those body symptoms, right? That client might decide, listen, I'm going to have to enjoy the sunshine for a bit. I can see root cause. I have a lot of work to do, but I'm only getting control of my life here. I'm going to go off on the sunset for a wee bit. And so your conscious contract begins and ends in maps and patterns. If that client decides, look, I want to do some deeper work, then you have another piece of conscious contracting to do. And she sees that in maps and patterns that this is deeper and I'm ready for it and I've got capacity for it and I can resource myself well enough. And this has built so much hope and capacity in my system that I'm ready to deepen. Then we know that we're going to be moving to root cause. And if we know the depth of root cause at that stage, because the maps and patterns has shown it, and we are seeing some very difficult childhood trauma, we could be down here for months. Because all these shells of awareness have to open up. All this capacity has to open, and also this client will have to learn titration. They'll have to learn regulation. Even though they're not moving under those symptoms, yeah? Yes, Wendy. Wendy, if I have my way, maps and patterns will be a part of every single practitioner. If I have my way, maps and patterns is a universal precaution for sure. But did you see the way I didn't make it a part of the protocol for the first client? And do you see why? Because does that make sense? When you're doing the program, Wendy, this will all really kick in. Maps and patterns for me is really, really important. But let's put on the case study 3, because then you'll see the differentiation where you wouldn't go there first. All right. So have I answered the question about this client? So conscious contract for maps and patterns, she's grand. She is continuing to do the work for root cause. We've already, through maps and patterns, taken her from a level of process 3 up to a 5. So we now know we've created capacity. We've done the same with metacognition. We've done the same with introspection, just by the interventions that are inside maps and patterns. If you remember that, there's a full process of maps and patterns. Maps and patterns is shelves of awareness it's the first shelf of awareness when you get to see root cause. So there are a lot of clients who will come in and have no notion what root cause looks like. Once they do maps and patterns, then they're available there for the first time. So it's the first shelf of awareness before root cause. And what you will get, Armanda, is you'll get a lot of people who'll see that and say, no, thank you, which is completely and utterly their prerogative. But if we give them a wee bit of psychoeducation, that they've still got root cause and they're still going to be triggered. So what does a trigger look like for somebody who's done maps and patterns? It looks like the first physiological symptom of anxiety, but not the build. We stop maps and patterns, stops the build, doesn't stop the trigger. Because it's not a full frontal lobotomy, thanks be to Jesus. We're not magicians. We don't have the capacity to take out the limbic system or the amygdala. All we've got the capacity to do is stop the build. But that might be enough for somebody who's been phobic of their own body, who's been waking up with neuroception, checking their body every day, you know, terrified by their own symptoms. That might be enough healing for a year until they have created enough general ease and capacity in their system, and then they'll come back for deepening. But that will be part of your exit plan for that client. And exit plans become part of your treatment plans, because you would never leave that client exit without helping them understand the psychoeducation of root cause. Because that's part of preparing them and helping them we understand what's happening to them. Does that make sense? That makes sense? Okay. All right. So let's differentiate now with client 2 or client 3. So this client has a very low stage of process, stage 2. Has a trauma response. Is likely, I'll say that again, is likely to have a trauma response to Unity. Has no tolerance of her body, is very, very poor at therapeutic exchange, therapeutic relationship, because her neuroception and her perception and all of her threat system is so busy at trying to keep herself safe that she cannot be in connection. Do you know that stage, Rachel? Tough. Her metacognition is low as a result because she doesn't want to be available to your mind, because if she's available to your mind, then she'll be available to some of the material that's on there. Her introspection is low and her levels of root cause are low. What do we do first? Do we go straight to root cause? Absolutely not. Do we do maps and patterns? Absolutely not. She's not ready for that. She doesn't have the unity to be able to do maps and patterns, and we're likely to put her into a trauma response if we return her to her body. Do we continue kicking around the dirt in therapeutic exchange? Absolutely not. So the first thing that we do is we move to unity work. Unity work is the pre-therapeutic work prior to maps and patterns. It's kind of like, for all of you that are trained in EM, it's kind of like EM, one module of EM. So it's unity with titration and regulation. So you're returning her back to your body very slowly, very safely, with a lot of regulatory tools. Because you could not do, no, part B is a very different thing. I'm going to come to part B now in a minute. Thank you for reminding me, right? And thank you, Sandra, for reminding me about part B as well, right? Do you see why you couldn't do maps and patterns with this client? She has no unity, and she's likely to, if she goes to unity, if you bring her to your body, yes, she'll re-traumatize her. So this is a very, very slow process. So you could be talking about 6 weeks before you would talk about maps and patterns. So if you think about 6 weeks of unity work and maybe 12 weeks of maps and patterns work, you're 18 weeks in the body. How does this feel to you? Are you rolling your eyes going, Jesus, there's a lot of work? Hopefully. Because if you are, I'm doing a good job. Do you see the importance of chunking that down? You could be 6 weeks in unity work. You could be 6 weeks in unity capacity work, tolerance work, psycho education work. That's all the pre-work to allow us access safely to the body. Once we get into the body, then we can create unity. Once we get and create once we get in the body, we can stop the build, and then we can start to see what root cause is. And that will, could you imagine in those 12 weeks, what stage of process, what did I say, 6 weeks for unity work, and then 68 weeks, isn't that what I said, for maps and patterns? Yeah, isn't that right? So it's 14 weeks, isn't that what I said? So I'm looking at it now, 14 weeks, give or take a few weeks. In those 14 weeks, this client has come out of the stage 2 process. Where is she likely to end up inside those 14 weeks? With all that dedicated intervention work. Where's she likely? Hit me up in the chat, let me know. Let me know. In 14 weeks, she's come out of stage 2 process. How far is she likely to get? What's her levels of therapeutic exchange going to be like? What's her levels of metacognition going to be like? Stage 4, brilliant, brilliant. You would get her up to there, wouldn't you? Wouldn't that be brilliant? Do you see the difference in therapeutic exchange? Yes. Do you see what is the difference between somebody in therapeutic exchange 2, or sorry, stage of process 2 and stage of process 4? What is the difference in the conversation of therapeutic exchange there? Do you see the difference in how they will communicate and you will communicate with them? Is night and day. It's not about other people. Yes, Diane, the capacity to explore, and the body naming, understanding that it's not them, it's me, and here it is in me. And here's this thing in me, and quite possibly, and I know I'm talking about clearing here, but here's this emotion in me, and this emotion in me belongs to that child in the them. That this pattern that's showing up in me through my exchange with that person, stage 2, it's them, is now me, and I'm beginning to see where this might be. There is a different capacity in the therapeutic exchange, which leads to root cause, which leads to the first shelf of awareness, which leads to being able to very safely walk into root cause and to the key and core threats. And this is a client who showed up with no root cause. This is a client who showed up with low number 2 in introspection, number 2 on meta. Now, these numbers that I'm using, I know it's so difficult. And that's why we talk about conscious contract, Margaret. That's the reality. That's the reality. When you step out the work, then the client knows the work that's needed and they can chunk this down. Yeah. It doesn't, Diane, that's the truth. In limited counselling, if you have 6 weeks, you have to chunk off a piece of this and work with it. Because it's difficult. If you've got 6 weeks, there is no point, and we've had loads of people come through this process and learn it so that they can use the 6 weeks that they have, or maybe the extended 10 weeks purposefully. So it would depend on the client, and what you might be able to do is get a good bit of body work done in the 10 weeks that you have, for the 6 weeks, and with the extended, maybe you get 4 extended sometimes. So at least you're able to, inside that model, then decide, look, I'm going to do this work and consciously contract. If you're Margaret, if you're in private practice, which a lot of us are as well, is that you're chunking down this work and saying, look, this is what needs to be done. But I think that's very freeing to the client, because the client can choose how long, and maybe, maybe it's financial. Client goes away, gets himself to a certain level of regulation, goes away, comes back. But that's the conversation that you have with the client. The client doesn't walk away saying this didn't work. Client walks away saying, I have more work to do, and here's the work I have to do. And that is not helpless nor hopeless. It's very, very, very empowering. Client doesn't walk away saying, oh, I didn't eliminate this and I'm never going to be able to. Client says, I have work to do here. I understand the system. I understand the work that I need. And sometimes when you're in root cause, what you think might be 12 weeks ends up 2 years. But the client understands that the process of all of these stages of awareness and these levels of awareness are bringing them deeper into root cause. It's it's so important. Conscious contracting is so relevant to the model, because we're not misleading anybody. We wouldn't want to mislead. Look, you're somebody's life in your hands. If you've ever experienced anxiety, you will know, and ever experienced panic or disassociation, you will know how absolutely life-threatening it can be. So this is why, for me, the treatment plan is the central tenet to our program, because we have to break this stuff down, and we have to know what protocols we're putting in place at what stage and what timeframes we're talking about. And we have to understand what conscious contracts we're entering into. And if that client comes out of that contract, then we understand from psychoeducation, from the model, what work is left to do. And we have a network of therapists. So what we're saying is, look, you know, if I can't do it, then somebody else might be able to do it when you're ready. So, Margaret, so vitally important. So is that helpful? Was those 3 clients in those 3 different ways inside those, was that going to let me know if that was helpful to you? Was that helpful, Donna? Was that helpful, Anne? Let me know. Good, Rachel. Could you see your own process on that, and your own deepening process on that? And could you, Rachel, could you see your own process prior to coming to clearing, prior to coming to anxiety? Could you see where your process was outside the method? That's what I'm saying. And how you will be bouncing around. Because I think that's really important. Really, really important. Okay. So last but not least, you're typing away, Rachel. I'll see your wee response now in a minute. No, you're out. So this part B is a really important piece. Now, it's so important that we teach it as a module itself inside the program. So if you look at the way this is chunked down, this is a full module. So understanding the threat system, yeah, that's a full module. This is 3 modules, because we do unity, we do maps, we do unity, patterns, and then maps. 3 separate. If anybody's done this training or rolling their eyes saying don't know, doesn't have to go through it. So we do unity work, which is the pre-therapeutic work that some clients go. No problem at all, Thomas. Take care. I'm so delighted it's beneficial to you, and hopefully I might see you inside the program. So we do this module, which is unity. So we do this threat module, then we do unity module, then we do the patterns module separately, the maps module separately, and then we do the undoing. And that comes with its own skill base, which is brilliant. That's perfect. Then we do root cause and undoing root cause and getting to root cause, and that's its own module, and these 2 take the most weeks. But we have another module which talks about part B alone. What is part B? If your clients have had a very, very, and which most people have, a very long experience and relationship with anxiety, once they get out of anxiety, so once they have done the work and they have finished root cause, that mind is petrified that they'll ever, ever, ever have to go back and re-experience any of that ever again. And that becomes a real intervention in and of itself. And it's very, very different, the intolerance of the symptoms. It's intolerance of the experience, because they have been through a traumatic, when you live with anxiety, it is a traumatic daily experience. And when you get free from it, the system will always see it as a threat until you work collectively as a separate intervention. And then the system will release itself. And this part B, intolerance, is a real phenomenon, a real psychological phenomenon for somebody who's been experiencing or experienced anxiety for a very long time. And it needs its own module. It needs its own wee house. It needs its own set of protocols. It needs its own set of interventions, and it needs its own processes. Because it's very different from A, but can show up very similarly. So we teach you in the model just to separate it out. How does that feel, Lise? And undoing and maps and patterns is the break point. You remember we got to the break point? So that's the undoing part. You literally get the break, and you get to undo the associations that you have, that your mind and body has made with the physical symptoms. Is that helpful, Anne? Okay, so therein lies the complete framework, and therein lies the chunking down. So if we go back to chunking this down, Armand, have I answered the time? Have I answered the time thing all right at this stage? Have I? So here's the really important bit, right? If a client shows up and they show up in therapeutic exchange and you haven't done your assessments in terms of your stage of process assessment, you will likely get sucked into therapeutic exchange for longer than you ever intended to. So you could be 12 weeks in there and not move any needle. Right? Because you're not meeting the client where they're at, you're not understanding their stages of process, you're not understanding their capacity, you're just not understanding it. So the assessment stops that from happening. So you have 12 weeks on your side. You've already banked the extra 12 weeks by just doing one assessment. Does that make sense to you? So if from that assessment, you have to do the first stage of the body stuff, which is the unity, we're talking 6 to 8 weeks, 6 to 8 weeks there, 6 to 8 weeks in maps and patterns. So that 12 weeks is then really well spent, because you're not kicking the can around therapeutic exchange, you're actually doing something that moves the needle. Now, here's a word of warning. See, once you start working like this, you'll be inundated with clients, because word will get out and you'll be inundated. What happens is your referral, and what's that, Armandy? Yes, 6 weeks, 6 weeks, sorry, back to client 1, 6 weeks. So, well, 6 weeks, it depends what, they've one event. If that client, back to client 1, if that client opens up something that's traumatic from childhood, you might have 6 weeks for the one event, but if they open up anything in any of the shelves awareness where they have felt like that as children, then you'll get that. You'll have a lot, you might have 6 months. Great question. So we're talking 6 weeks to 12 weeks, 16 weeks here. And then we're talking depending on the type of key threat and the type of core threat that we have to work with. If we're talking with a client with a lot of key threats, because we're now available to the root cause and the client, we put a time frame on that. We could be 6 months, we could be a year, we could be a year and a half on here. And then we're talking about a client who's done all of that work, who may come back with re-experiencing anxiety, which is very normal, but we would psychoeducate the client before they left so that they understood. They might need to come back for that, but if they did, we would keep a window of that open so that we could because that's a very easy thing to turn off. Once you've done all of this work, that is a walk in the park. That's 2 sessions. 2 to 3 sessions. That can be done on an intensive, that can be done on half a day, depends how you work. So even whilst this can feel horrific to the client, it's actually really easily worked with. And the module teaches you all the protocols and all that for that. Okay, it is 8:45 on a Monday evening. Anne is like, I have had enough. So I'm done. So Kim, it's a great question. How experienced or qualified do you need to be to do the course? Look, we have had loads of people do this from all walks of life, from a coaching walk of life, who's a lot of experience and work on my clients, and we have therapeutic. So if you have a pre-qualifying pre-qualified qualification, then it suffice. We walk you through it. Remember, there's a supervision element of it as well, Kim, at the other end. So we hold your hand as well as you process and as you're working with this model. So what we ask you to do is we ask you not to practice when we're teaching it. So we just teach it, and then we ask you not to be in practice, and then we tell you once we've taught it, go practice, and then we hold supervision for you then, which is all part of the price of the course. It's all part of the bonus price. Then we hold the supervision then, Kim, so that I can say, oh, you're probably too long there, or I wouldn't do that, I would jump to there, or if you have a client case study you want to bring, then I can help you conceptualize your case. Does that make sense? There's one thing that I didn't say that I do want to clear up. We have a score system. I'll just show it to you very. Have I got it? Armandy, I'm going to have a look at this if you want to say that out loud. I'm just going to stop the share. If you want to say that out loud, you can. I'm looking for something that I want to share, please.
I think I'm unique in the sense that I'm not a therapist. I'm a coach. I come from a leadership coaching background. So I probably have to catch up on some of the therapeutic learning, but I have been a psychology teacher for years and I have other certifications in therapeutic things, but I'm not a therapist. So that's an example that's helpful.
But
everybody else on here is a therapist, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a few coaches that have done it, but their background in coaching has been strong, like yours. You know, they have a psychology masters, or they have a foundation in this practice, and they're coaching to a high level. That's for the coaches, and for any of the therapists that you've done your basic training. So hopefully, right, I'm going to share this because I'm going to fly through it, but I want you to show you the scoring system, right? Because I forgot to mention that. We have, if you're going to come with us in the training, we have a system, right? No bother, Rachel, see you soon. All right, darling. We have a scoring system that I just want to show you that happens because the last module is this module, is the treatment plan module. So we've done all of the modules that's on it, and then your last and final module of the training is your treatment plan. And I just want to share this now. So we have a scoring system, all right? So this is all of the assessments, right? I'm just going to fly through it for you, right? These are your pre-assessments, and you can see the numbers and the scores here, right? So what we do there with that is inside the very final module is that we teach you how to score. The highest score is 27, right? And it's called 27 FF, and the lowest score is called I think it's 5, and it's 5 TR. So we teach you the score like you would score a core, right? And from that understanding, you'll know exactly where your client is and what interventions are likely to be within the scores. I don't like to systemize it too much. I want you to use your own judgment in terms of your scores. But as an example, that last client that I shared with you, the very low stage of client was 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. She was 9, so she scored 9 out of a possible 27, which denotes the low stage of process. Does that make sense? Wendy, that's all part of it. So you'll be taught all of that, and you'll be given all of that documentation. And then it's up to you then, if you're working with core scores, to blend that in. So you'll be taught to measure all of that, and then that you'll be taught then within that what levels of interventions you might need for the low score. So it'll all make sense to you, and that's all part of the treatment plan. Has anybody any questions? Did I do a good enough job at explaining the treatment plan and the importance of the treatment plan? Did I? Is all right with that? Okay. So the last thing to say then, I'm going to wait for the questions. If anybody's any questions, please put them in there. We have opened up the training, as you know, for October and February. And some of you have already joined, which is fantastic. The bonus extends for another, I think, 24 hours, maybe two days, maybe it finishes on Tuesday night. So the bonus for 40% off a course is still there. It's still available to you, and the payment plans are all still there. I know that we had a long break from our last session to this session, and we some emails about times and stuff, and we're still going to hold on to the bonus. So we're still there. The bonus is still open. The price is still there. I think the price is still $795. All the modules that I have mentioned is still available. If you have any questions whatsoever about how it's taught, or I know some people were asking about the timings can change. The timings are what they are. If you're not able to come to the live, then the recording is available. There's many people that come to the recording, and then I'll hand on feedback or questions so that I can answer live, and that's all right as well. And then I'll be able to see your work. Okay, so hopefully that answers all your questions. It has been a pleasure to be able to share my work. Thank you for being so receptive of it. Hopefully, no problem, Diane. Hopefully it has informed your practice already. Hopefully it has changed the way you think about treating anxiety. And because that's more important than anything else, the way that we show up for our clients and the way that we systematically go at this. So thank you so much for your kind, careful attention. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Caroline. Thank you, Wendy. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Kim. It was so gorgeous. Thanks, Verity and Donna, everybody. Thank you, Margaret. Thank you. Good. I'm glad that I'm changing them, because that is the only way forward. If we're going to do this differently, this is the only way forward. Okay, I sounded like I was part of a cult. The only way forward, you know what I mean. It is a really important part of the change in the field. I will see you all soon. Much love. Hope to see you inside the training, and take care for now. See you all soon. Bye. 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 Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.